A small hand shot out and grabbed a stranger's fingers. It squeezed hard. A little girl pressed herself against a big man's side like she'd known him her whole life. She looked up. Her lips barely moved. "Please pretend you're my dad," she whispered. The man froze. He didn't know this child. He'd never seen her before in his life, not once. But her hand was shaking and her eyes were locked hard on something across the terminal. He followed her gaze. A man in a gray coat stood by the far wall, watching. Not moving at all, just watching her. The big man's name was Ryan Coulter, and 3 days earlier he'd been carried off a transport plane on a stretcher. He came to this bus station to be alone. What Ryan did in the next 5 minutes would change 2 lives forever. Stay with me on this one. Now let me back up and tell you how Ryan Coulter ended up in that terminal in the first place. 3 days before, he was in a hospital bed with a torn-up shoulder and a ringing in his ears that wouldn't quit. The doctors called it medical leave. Ryan called it being useless. 12 years in the Navy, 8 of them with the SEAL teams. And now they'd handed him a sling and a bottle of pills and told him to go home and rest. Trouble was, Ryan didn't really have a home, not the kind with people in it. His folks were gone. He'd never married. The only living thing that depended on him was riding in the back of his truck right now, and that was a dog. Bosco, a German shepherd, gray around the muzzle, 10 years old and built like a tank. Bosco had done 2 deployments before his hips gave out. Now he was a civilian, same as Ryan was trying to be. The 2 of them made a matched set, both worn down, both a little slower than they used to be, both still watching every door and every room they walked into. Ryan had driven to the Norfolk terminal that afternoon for one simple reason. His truck had blown a water pump on the highway, and the tow guy said it'd be 4 hours before he could get to it. 4 hours. So Ryan walked to the nearest place with a roof and a bench, which happened to be the bus station, and he sat down to wait it out. He wasn't looking for anybody. He wasn't looking for trouble. He had his duffel bag between his boots, and on the side of that duffel, stitched in gold thread, was a small patch, a trident, an eagle, an anchor, a pistol, the symbol every SEAL earns and never forgets. That patch is important. Remember it, because a little girl across the room saw it before she saw anything else about him. Ryan noticed her before she ever touched his hand. You learn to notice things in his line of work. She was maybe 8 years old. Brown hair in a crooked ponytail, somebody had clearly done themselves. A backpack too big for her shoulders, and she was alone. That was the thing that snagged his eye. A kid that small, alone in a bus station at the end of the day. No mother digging through a purse. No father checking a phone, just her. She was standing near the vending machines, pretending to read the departures board, but her head kept turning. Little quick glances over and over toward the far wall, and every time she looked scared. Ryan followed her eyes, casual, the way he'd been trained, and there he was. A man in a gray coat standing by the pay phones nobody used anymore. Thin, middle-aged, a face like a closed door. He wasn't waiting for a bus. He had no bag. He wasn't looking at the board or his phone or anything else in that whole terminal. He was looking at the girl, only the girl. Ryan felt something go cold and steady in his chest. It was a feeling he knew well. The feeling right before everything goes bad. He watched the man for a full minute, and in that minute the man drifted, not fast. Just a slow shift along the wall, closing the distance between himself and the child by maybe 10 feet. Casual, like he had all the time in the world, like he'd done this before. The girl saw it too. Her whole body went stiff, and that's when she made her move. She didn't run for a security guard. There wasn't one. She didn't scream. She scanned the room fast, the way a drowning person scans the water, and her eyes stopped on Ryan. On the big man with the sling and the gray dog and the gold trident stitched on his bag. She walked straight to him. She didn't hesitate. She slid her small, cold hand into his big, scarred one, pressed herself against his arm and whispered the words that started all of this. "Please pretend you're my dad. Just for a minute, please." Now here's the thing about Ryan Coulter. A lot of men would have pulled their hand back. A lot of men would have said, "Kid, I don't know you, go find your mom," and nobody would have blamed them. Ryan didn't do that. He looked down at this trembling little girl. Then he looked back across the room at the man in the gray coat who had gone very still. And Ryan understood the whole story in 1 second flat, so he did the only thing that made sense. He crouched down, slow because of the shoulder, until he was eye to eye with her, and he smiled like he'd been waiting for her all afternoon. "There you are," he said, easy and warm, loud enough to carry. "I was starting to think you got lost. You get a snack." The girl blinked. For half a second she didn't understand. Then she caught on, and something in her face loosened just a little. "Not yet," she said. "Well, come sit with your old man then," Ryan said. And he put his big arm around her small shoulders and turned her gently so her back was to the man in the coat, and her front was to Ryan and the dog. Bosco stood up. 10 years old, bad hips and all, that dog stood up off the floor and moved. He walked around the two of them in a slow arc and planted himself between the child and the wall where the gray coat waited. He sat, ears up, facing the man, and he did not move again. If you've never seen a working dog decide something is his to guard, I'll tell you, it changes the temperature of a room. The man in the gray coat stopped drifting. Ryan kept his voice light. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he murmured low now just for her. "Emma," she whispered, "Emma Vance." That name meant nothing to Ryan yet, but it would. Oh, it would. "He's been following me," Emma said, staring at Ryan's chest so she wouldn't have to look past him, "since I got off the bus. I went to the bathroom and he waited outside. I got a water and he was there. I don't know him, I don't know who he is." Ryan nodded, slow and calm, though inside him something had switched fully on. 12 years of training doesn't leave a man just because he's on medical leave. "Okay," he said. "Okay, Emma. You did the right thing, you picked good." "How did you know?" he asked her. "How'd you know to come to me?" Emma finally looked up at him. And she pointed one small finger at the gold trident on his duffel bag. "My daddy had one of those," she said. Ryan's whole world tilted an inch and he didn't even know why yet. He just felt it, the way you feel a change in the weather before the clouds show up. He looked at the patch, he looked at this child. "My daddy had one of those. There are only a few thousand men on Earth who ever earned that pin." "Where's your daddy now?" Ryan asked. Real gentle. Emma's chin trembled. "He died," she said. And then quieter, "So did my mom, 2 weeks ago." And there it was. 8 years old, alone in a bus station, a stranger stalking her across the floor and both her parents in the ground. Ryan felt the bottom drop out of the whole afternoon. Behind him, across the terminal, the man in the gray coat took one step forward. Bosco's head lowered an inch and a sound came out of that old dog's chest that you felt more than heard. The man stopped again. Ryan didn't turn around. He kept his eyes on Emma and his voice steady as a heartbeat. "Where were you going?" he asked. "On that bus, all by yourself?" Emma dug into the front pocket of her too big backpack and pulled out a folded piece of paper, soft and worn from being handled 100 times. She handed it to him like it was the most important thing she owned. Maybe it was. Ryan unfolded it. It was a bus ticket, and stapled to it was a handwritten note, an address up in Richmond, and a name, a man's name. Underneath, in a shaky adult hand, someone had written, "Emma will travel alone. Please make sure she gets on the right connection. She is a good girl. They said I have to go live with him," Emma said. "My mom's cousin, I never met him. The lady from the office put me on the bus this morning and said he'd pick me up here and drive me the rest of the way. She said his name is Dale." Ryan looked slowly, finally, over his shoulder. The man in the gray coat was still there, still watching. And when Ryan's eyes met his, the man didn't flinch. He didn't look away like a guilty stranger would. He just gave a small, cold nod, like a man who thought he had every right in the world to be there. "You Dale," Ryan called across the floor, flat. No question in it, really. The man in the gray coat smiled. It was not a nice smile. "That's right," he said. "And that's my girl you've got your hands on, friend, so how about you let her go?" For a long moment nobody moved. The dog, the soldier, the little girl, the man in the coat. 4 still points in a terminal full of people rushing past, none of them noticing a thing. Then Ryan Coulter did something that surprised even him. He stood up. He put Emma behind him. And he said, in a voice as calm as a Sunday morning, "She's not going anywhere with you." And just like that, the man's smile went out and the whole thing changed. Now, if this were a simpler story, that's where it would end. Big soldier stares down creepy man backs off, everybody goes home. And for about 5 minutes, that's exactly what it looked like. Because Dale didn't rush him, he looked at the dog. He looked at the size of Ryan's shoulders, sling and all. He looked at the 2 families walking past and the ticket agent glancing over. And he was a coward the way most of them are. So he raised both hands, palms out, and he backed off. "We'll see about that," he said quietly. And he turned and walked toward the doors into the gray evening, and he was gone. Ryan let out a breath he'd been holding for 2 minutes. He crouched back down to Emma. She was crying now, silent, the way kids cry when they've learned that making noise doesn't help. Ryan wiped her cheek with his thumb, clumsy about it because he'd never done that for anybody before in his life. "Hey," he said. "Hey. He's gone, you see that? He's gone." He walked her over to a bench near the ticket counter in the light, out in the open where anyone could see. He sat her down. He got Bosco to lie across her feet like a warm sandbag, and the dog did it, and Emma put one small hand down into his fur and held on. Ryan fed $1 into the machine and got her a bottle of water and a package of crackers, and she drank the water in long, grateful gulps like she hadn't had anything all day. Probably she hadn't. For a minute it was almost peaceful. The rain ticked against the big windows. Emma ate her crackers. Ryan sat beside her with his elbows on his knees, thinking he'd call the police, thinking the worst was over, thinking he'd get this kid somewhere safe and then go back to being alone. He really thought it was over. It was not over, because the doors opened again and Dale came back in. And this time he was not alone. Walking beside him was a woman in a business suit with a lanyard around her neck and a leather folder under her arm, and half a step behind them both was a uniformed police officer. And Dale was pointing straight at Ryan. "That's him," Dale said, loud now, loud enough for the whole terminal to hear. "That's the man. He grabbed my niece. He won't let her go. See, that's how the ground shifted. A second ago Ryan was the good guy standing between a child and a predator. Now here came a cop and a woman with a badge on a lanyard, and the man in the gray coat had gotten to them first with his version. And Ryan realized, cold all through, that this wasn't a fight he could win with his fists or his dog. This had just become a fight over paper, over who was allowed to have this little girl. And on paper right now, he was a stranger holding somebody else's child. The woman with the lanyard stepped forward. "Sir," she said, "I'm with County Family Services. I need you to step away from the minor." Ryan didn't move. Emma had grabbed his sleeve with both hands. "He's lying," Ryan said. "That man was stalking her across this station for 20 minutes. She came to me. Ask her." The officer put a hand up, calm, professional. "Sir, I understand you're upset. But this gentleman has documentation. He's the child's court-appointed guardian. So I'm going to need you to take a step back and we'll sort this out." Dale opened his leather folder and yeah, there it was. A stack of papers, official-looking, county letterhead, a signature. Guardianship of the minor Emma Vance granted to Dale Renner. A social worker's name. A judge's stamp. And that, right there, is where a lot of good men lose. Because Dale had the paper, and paper beats truth in a room full of strangers every single time. Ryan looked at the papers. Then he looked at Emma. And Emma, God bless her, wasn't looking at the papers at all. She was looking up at Ryan with her whole heart in her face, and she said one thing quiet just to him. "Don't let him take me. Please, he hurts." 2 words, he hurts. And everything in Ryan Coulter went quiet and clear, the way it used to go before a mission, when all the noise burns off and there's only the thing that has to be done. Now, before I tell you what Ryan did next, do me one favor. If you're the kind of person who believes a kid like Emma deserves somebody in her corner, hit that subscribe button right now, because this next part is why I do this. All right, back to the terminal. Ryan straightened up slow. He kept both hands loose and visible, the way you do around a nervous cop. He wasn't going to give anybody a reason. "Officer," he said, "my name is Ryan Coulter. I'm a Chief Petty Officer with the United States Navy, currently on medical leave, and I've got my ID in my back pocket. I'm going to reach for it slow." "That all right with you?" Something in the way he said it, the flat steadiness of it, made the officer nod. Ryan pulled out his military ID and his hospital paperwork and handed them over. The cop looked at them, and his whole posture changed just a little, because a random guy grabbing a kid is one thing. A decorated SEAL on medical leave who happens to have a service dog planted between the child and a stranger, that's a different picture. "I'm not disputing anybody's paperwork," Ryan said. "I'm asking one thing. Before that girl goes anywhere, ask her, in front of all of us, whether she wants to go with that man. And watch her face when she answers." The woman from Family Services hesitated. And to her credit, that hesitation is the whole reason this story doesn't end in a tragedy. Because she'd been doing her job long enough to know that paper lies sometimes. She crouched down in front of Emma, gentle, and she said, "Sweetheart, is this man your Uncle Dale?" Emma pressed herself into Ryan's side and shook her head so hard her crooked ponytail whipped back and forth. "He's not my uncle," she said. "My mom didn't have any cousin named Dale. I never saw him before yesterday." The terminal went very quiet. Dale laughed, but it came out wrong. "She's a traumatized child," he said quickly. "She's been through a lot. She doesn't know what she's saying. It's all in the file." But the officer was looking at the file now, really looking. And here's the thing about men like Dale. They're good at fooling one person at a time in a hurry with a stack of papers. They are not good at being looked at slowly by a cop who's suddenly paying attention. The officer read the guardianship order out loud, and he frowned. "This is a photocopy," he said. "Where's the original court seal? And this social worker's name?" he said to the woman from the county. "You know a caseworker by this name?" The woman shook her head slowly. "No," she said, "and that's not our office's letterhead. It's close, but it's not ours." That's when Dale ran. He didn't argue. He didn't explain. A guilty man knows the exact half-second the room turns against him, and Dale knew it, and he bolted for the doors. And I want you to understand, he was fast, and there was a crowded terminal between him and freedom, and that police officer was 10 feet flat-footed behind him. But Dale forgot about the dog. Bosco had been lying across Emma's feet that whole time, still as a rug, old and gray and half asleep by the look of him. But that dog had spent his whole life waiting for exactly one command, and the command was a man running from his people. Ryan didn't even say a word. He just made a short, sharp sound between his teeth, a sound Bosco hadn't heard in 2 years, and that old shepherd came up off the floor like the years fell off him. 10 years old. Bad hips. Didn't matter. Bosco cut across that terminal floor low and fast, and hit the back of Dale's knee, just as the man reached the doors. Dale went down hard onto the wet tile, and Bosco stood over him, 80 pounds of muscle and gray fur, teeth bared an inch from the man's face, that deep sound rolling out of his chest. Dale didn't move a muscle. Smart of him. It was the first smart thing he'd done all day. The officer was on him a second later, cuffs out. And as he hauled Dale up, the man's coat fell open, and something slid out of the inside pocket and clattered onto the floor. It was a roll of duct tape and a folding knife. Nobody in that terminal said anything for a moment. They all just looked at that duct tape on the floor and understood, all at once, what had almost happened to a little girl that evening. What Dale had planned to do the second he got Emma out to a car. The woman from Family Services pulled Emma close and turned her away so she wouldn't see. But Emma had already stopped watching Dale a while ago. She was watching Ryan. She'd been watching Ryan the whole time. They took Dale out in the back of a patrol car. It turned out over the next few days that his real name wasn't Dale at all. He was a man who watched the obituaries. That was his whole method. He read the death notices in small-town papers looking for a very particular kind of tragedy. A child left behind, no close family, and a bureaucracy slow enough that a confident man with a folder full of forged papers could step into the gap and walk a kid right out the door before anybody upstream noticed. He'd done it before, in 2 other states. Emma would have been the third, but she wasn't. Because a truck blew a water pump on the highway, and a broken-down soldier who wanted nothing but to be left alone sat down on the wrong bench at the right time. Now, the reason Emma had a chance at all comes down to the thing she said in the very beginning. "My daddy had one of those." She pointed at the Trident, and once the police started making calls, that little detail cracked the whole thing open, and it broke Ryan Coulter's heart clean in 2. Because Emma Vance's father had been Petty Officer First Class Daniel Vance, a SEAL, and when the duty officer at the base read that name over the phone to Ryan that night, Ryan had to sit down on the curb outside the terminal and put his head between his knees. He knew that name. Danny Vance had been on the team 2 rotations before Ryan's shoulder got torn up. They'd never served on the same op, but Ryan knew the name the way you know the names on a wall. Danny Vance had been killed 3 years back. Everybody in the community knew the story, and everybody knew he'd left a wife and a little girl behind. That little girl had just spent the evening holding Ryan's hand. Emma's mother, it came out, had held things together on her own for 3 hard years, and then a sickness took her fast, in a matter of months, the kind that doesn't care how many people need you. No grandparents living. No aunts, no uncles worth the name. Just a county office, a stack of forms, and a bus ticket for a child traveling alone. That's how a decorated SEAL's daughter ended up worth nothing to the system but a name on a form. And that's the gap a man like Dale lived in. Ryan sat on that curb in the rain a long time. Bosco leaned against him, soaked to the skin, and didn't move. And I think if you'd asked him, Ryan couldn't have told you exactly what he was feeling. Guilt, maybe, though none of it was his fault. The weight of a brother he'd never met. And under all of it, something he hadn't felt in a long time. A reason. When he finally stood up, he walked back inside, and he found the woman from Family Services, and he said 7 words that changed the rest of his life. "What do I have to do," he asked, "to make sure she's safe?" It was not simple. I won't pretend it was. There were background checks and home visits and a mountain of paperwork, and Ryan Coulter, who had faced down armed men on 3 continents, told me later that nothing scared him like the day he sat across a table from a judge and asked to be allowed to keep an 8-year-old girl. Emma stayed in an emergency foster home for a few weeks while it all got sorted. But here's the part that matters. Ryan came to see her every single day. He'd show up in the afternoon with Bosco in the truck, and the 2 of them would sit in that foster family's backyard, and Emma would tell him about her day, and Ryan would listen like it was the most important briefing he'd ever received. He didn't push. He didn't make big promises he couldn't keep. He'd learned a long time ago that you don't tell a person you'll protect them. You just show up, and you show up again. And after enough days, they start to believe it on their own. And Emma started to believe it. The Navy community closed ranks around her the way that community does. Danny Vance's old teammates found out there was a Gold Star kid who'd nearly been taken, and men she'd never met drove hours to stand in the back of a courtroom in their dress, uniforms the day the guardianship hearing came up. They didn't say much. They just stood there, a row of tridents, so the judge could see exactly how many people this one small girl belonged to. Ryan got custody that spring. Formal adoption came later, but that spring day was the one that counted. He walked out of the courthouse with Emma's hand in his, the same small hand that had grabbed his fingers in a bus terminal, and this time she wasn't pretending. This time it was real. Bosco lived another 2 good years. He got to sleep at the foot of Emma's bed every night of them, and he got to walk her to the school bus every morning, slow and stiff and dignified, and he never once let her out of his sight until she was safely up the steps. When he finally passed, old and tired in his sleep, they buried him in the backyard under a dogwood tree, and Emma made a little wooden marker for him that said Bosco, good dog, best friend. And Ryan, who I'll remind you was a man who'd been shot at more times than he could count, cried like a child at that dog's grave, and he wasn't ashamed of it. Emma's doing all right now, more than all right. She's got a wall in her room full of her father's medals and her father's photo and his dress blues, and Ryan makes sure she knows exactly who Daniel Vance was and what he stood for and how much he loved her in the short time he had. She knows she comes from good people. She knows she's not alone. Not ever again. And sometimes on the hard nights, the ones that still come for kids who have lost as much as she lost, she'll come downstairs and find Ryan awake, because he doesn't sleep much either. And they'll sit together in the dark kitchen, the soldier and the girl, 2 people who were both a little broken when they found each other, and neither one of them has to say a word. You want to know the thing Ryan Coulter told me that I can't get out of my head? He said he drove to that bus station to disappear. He said he was so tired of being needed, tired of being responsible for other men's lives, that all he wanted in the whole world was 4 quiet hours where nobody depended on him for anything. And then a little hand slid into his and asked him to pretend to be her dad, just for a minute. He said the funny thing, the thing he still can't quite believe, is that he was the one who got saved that day. Not her, him. Because a man who's decided he's got nothing left to give will sometimes find out he was wrong, in the space of a single minute, on a rainy evening, in the last place on earth he ever thought to look. So if you ever find yourself thinking your best days are behind you, that nobody needs what you've got left, I want you to remember a broken-down soldier on a bench who almost got up and walked out, and a little girl who picked him out of a whole crowd because she saw one gold pin on his bag and somehow knew. She asked him to pretend, just for a minute. He ended up being her dad for the rest of his life.